Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues. I'm pleased to be rising today to speak to Bill C-3, which of course is yet another omnibus bill. 5 only this time. I think we should be lucky. In finance, we deal with the Budget Implementation Act that amends some 40 bills, so having only 5 is, or 60 perhaps in that last example, having only 5 I guess is a bit of a luxury. But Mr. Speaker, it's not so much the process I want to talk about today, but the substance. I think we can do much better than this legislation, which of course we will be supporting at this stage. I wish to also advise you, Mr. Speaker, that I'll be sharing my time with the honourable member for Churchill. You know, it's interesting and somewhat ironic that we're here today on the eve of what we understand to be the government's decision day on the Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline. I had the good fortune of running in a by-election in my community of Victoria and Oak Bay, coastal communities in British Columbia, in a by-election that took place in November of 2012. And as you would expect, and as I'm sure members on all sides of this House will have done, I knocked on a lot of doors and met a lot of people from various walks of life, old, young. Mr. Speaker, I didn't meet a single person that supported the Enbridge Northern Gateway proposal. Not one. Not one. And I have a duty and an honor to represent my coastal community, and I will do so to the best of my ability. But I believe that if this bill is a bit of window dressing, greasing the wheels for this project, the government ought to know that it has met utter opposition in British Columbia. And I thought that was perhaps the most poignant aspect of the opposition that I've encountered and observed, is the fact that it unites British Columbians in a way that I've never experienced in my life. I have never seen Aboriginal people leading protests of the kind and in the numbers that I've seen. I've never seen people who are retired teachers and retired bus drivers. I'm just thinking of examples in my immediate community. People who are very young and people who are at the end of their careers and indeed at the end of their lives, all united in opposition to what this government intends, I pray I'm wrong, to do. 2/3 of the population, I know the polls say, are opposed, but if you just scratch a little deeper, you won't find many people who think that it makes sense to ship it in tankers the size of the Eiffel Tower along some of the most dangerous waters on the planet into Hecate Strait. Diluted bitumen, a product for which we really have little understanding. We didn't even know at the Joint Review Panel whether it sank or would rise to the surface. That's the level of misunderstanding. Experts, I taught environmental law for over a dozen years, people who appeared before that committee, fellow lawyers who cross-examined, said they have never seen the dissonance between what a panel heard in testimony and what it concluded in its recommendations. It was 2 different realities. And that the cost-benefit analysis that would say it's fine to potentially extirpate a herd of caribou, an endangered species, because it's in the national interest, with no evidence for that, is really, quite frankly, shocking to British Columbians. That we would play Russian roulette with rivers full of endangered species, certain salmon stocks that may never come back if there were a spill. A product that is not heavy oil, it's diluted bitumen, and it ought not to be confused with what happened in Exxon Valdez, which was bad enough, as I'll explain. That this could possibly be approved by the Government of Canada in the face of ferocious opposition by young and old, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, coastal and non-coastal communities is frankly shocking to me, Mr. Speaker. And I just wish to reiterate that I will do, on behalf of the people of my community, whatever I can to make sure that this wrong-headed decision is never fully implemented in my province and in our country. Mr. Speaker, this bill deals with a number of matters that are somewhat germane to what I've been saying. I think entirely Canada Marine Act, Marine Liability Act, Canada Shipping Act, 3 of those statutes that are being amended. And some of the regulatory changes, I think, are to be commended. And for that reason, of course, this bill will have our full support. But, Mr. Speaker, what this government has done in Northern Gateway is handed the industry a poisoned chalice. By which I mean, as one industry leader said very eloquently, you know, we will get the permission perhaps from the government, but we will not get the permission from the people. The phrase social license has been used throughout this debate, and I know exactly what that industry leader said, that even if they give us the piece of paper, they will not have given us the legitimacy to proceed because people know in their guts that this process was flawed. They knew it was unfair and that a decision built on such a flawed process should not see the light of day. So it's really a poison chalice, and it's interesting that I see environmental organizations and First Nations and industry holding hands around that phenomenon, recognizing that they have indeed, industry will have been handed a poison chalice if the government were to proceed in the face of the ferocious opposition that is out there today. At the second reading debate, the Honourable Minister of Transport said a number of things about the bill, of course in respect of the proposed amendments to the Canada Shipping Act, and she talks about the amendments that would increase marine environmental protection by strengthening provisions pertaining to pollution prevention and response, and says that the amendments would aim to strengthen requirements for spill prevention and preparedness at oil handling facilities by requiring certain facilities submit both prevention and emergency plans to the Minister of Transport, to which I say bravo. But Mr. Speaker, when you don't have officials who are there to enforce those laws, who do not have the budget to insist on compliance, with the greatest of respect, it's irrelevant what the legislation would say. And we have seen the government consistently cut programs, cut offices that would deal with these very issues. And it means nothing that legislation like this would contain pretty words, full of sound and fury and signifying nothing, as Shakespeare would say. Because this legislation, like so many conservative initiatives, might look good on the surface, but if there's no personnel because they've all been cut, if there's no scientists because they've all been fired, if there's no office anymore, as in the case of the Kitsilano Coast Guard office or spill prevention offices, who cares? And people are not being fooled. They know that what we do in passing pretty laws with no people behind it to enforce it, and no political will, moreover, to enforce it, really doesn't matter very much. And that's what's so frustrating. The Conservatives, they say again, are full of sound and fury and really signify nothing in these kind of legislations. So the amendments, if people don't, for example, submit those plans, what happens then? Oh, we have administrative penalties, the minister tells us. You know, they've got $250 and sometimes even a range of $25,000 for an administrative monetary penalty for some matter that may not have been complied with. A, you have to actually do it. You have to bring a proceeding. And B, you have to collect it. Having worked on behalf of compliance with Canadian Environmental Protection Act when I had the good fortune of advising the Chief Review Officer under CEPA 99, I can tell you that these monetary penalties and these administrative regimes are excellent, but with no will to enforce them, who cares what they say? And who cares what even the amount is? And that is, the penalty amounts may sound impressive when they're increased, but again, no will, no fines, no action, nothing. Sound and fury signifying nothing. And so I'm not making it up when I say that this government has done so little by, in effect, closing the Kitsilano Coast Guard Station, by closing British Columbia's oil spill response center, and gutting the environmental emergency response programs. Do British Columbians trust, do Canadians trust this government to look after their precious environment with these cosmetic changes? I think not. And I think we will find that the members opposite, 21 of them, will face the wrath of British Columbians when they see, if indeed, I'm praying I'm wrong, the government were to ever allow the monstrosity of the Enbridge Northern Gateway project to see the light of day. With that, thank you, Mr. Speaker.